And she's opened the container, and look at all of those wonderful supplies sent up. Clearly is not attached to the station and is just floating freely. Genbi Kerbin making the situation worse by pushing it towards the solar panels, of all things. Simply placing the light against the hull and letting go doesn't seem to be working. Genbi Kerbin, of course, resorts to her usual tactic when she is frustrated, and she finds something and blows it up. Greetings and welcome to the Kerbal Space Center Launch Complex for yet another space launch by a private enterprise. This time, it is not Duna One and a bit, at least not directly. It is instead a new entrant into the Kerbal media empire that is Hobo Industries, a mysterious new player owned by an even more mysterious, well, owner. Someone who is never seen in polite society. Some say he is not even of the planet Kerbin. But such rumors are of no importance to the Duna One and a bit TV producers who are hungry for ever more coverage, ever more viewers, ever higher ratings for their reality TV show, and therefore they have collaborated with Hobo Industries to launch this new satellite television satellite. It is being lofted by the Wizard X Heavy, or rather a Wizard X Medium, perhaps. It has none of the solid rocket booster goodness or extra liquid fuel boosters. It is a stripped down, slimmed down and shortened version of the Heavy launch vehicle, and it is launching a very blunt payload, as you can see, on a very steep trajectory. The purpose of this is to get us out of the atmosphere before pitching over, at least out of the thicker part of the atmosphere, so as not to create too many aerodynamic forces on that big blunt tip. The shroud, which of course incorporates new technology, a new separating mechanic, which should hopefully produce less space debris, which, as we all know, is very important, especially when you're lofting extremely expensive satellites. And it has the added benefit of being much prettier, which hopefully will please some of our viewing audience. No more confetti in space, at least that is the mantra. We have now a good visual of the final launch stage, along with the Hobo Sat, as it is being called, on the end. The solar panels are out and retrieving energy, powering up the various systems in this inordinately expensive television distribution platform, which of course will bring the Duna One and a bit mission, along with all sorts of other reality television joys to the Kerbals of Kerbin. And we're getting separation of that final orbital injection stage. Now, it is, of course, under power, so it is going to deorbit itself in order to keep low Kerbin orbit clutter-free. Very important, this, of course, when you're operating such enormously expensive satellite platforms as this. Hobo Industries having shouldered the majority of the costs here of putting this up. And it is now orientating towards Kerbin and preparing to unfurl those mighty satellite dishes to start beaming wonderful television content across the planet below. Of course, Kerbals, unlike humans using low Kerbin orbits for their communication satellite systems, whereas, of course, ordinarily you would want to be in geosynchronous orbit, but Kerbals care not about these sorts of things, and apparently Hobo Industries has some kind of special technology in place. Very, very expensive technology, obviously, but it will allow them to broadcast from this low, perfectly safe orbit, in which there is no danger or debris left over from, for example, a Kerbal who was operating on the outside of... Ladies and gentlemen, I can confirm that the HoboSat 2000 satellite television platform was destroyed moments ago by a piece of orbital debris in low Kerbin orbit. The origin of that orbital debris is being tracked right now. However, I have heard exclusively that Hobo Industries are holding the Duna One and a bit team responsible. However, the Duna One and a bit TV executives and producers have other things on their mind right now, as the exploded debris from the HoboSat is in an orbital path that will bring it into dangerous proximity with the Wistar One, and therefore an evacuation has been ordered. The Kerbmates are coming home. They're coming home earlier than previously planned. Patlas Kerbin is transferring now into the first escape pod, and with him he is going to take Lena Kerbin, the loner Kerbmate, the one whom is perhaps less trusted. Patlas, of course, is the most experienced individual up there. Kerbin Kerbin has EVA'd in order to, well, I mean, she's feeling a little bit sheepish, it has to be said, but nonetheless, if the HoboSat debris does not in fact collide with the Wistar One, then the satellite can potentially be revived. The base can be revived and reused and repurposed at some later point, and therefore Kerbin Kerbin has been ordered to once again attempt to attach the communication and command and control systems that were sent up originally to allow ground control to operate the outpost remotely. Now, in order to do that, a new plan has been formulated. She is going to attach to the station a mounting platform which will be wired up to the control systems in the command section of the outpost, and then she can attach the computer control module to that, and hopefully, with any luck, the TV producers are somewhat confident that will in fact allow the whole outpost to be operated remotely until or unless such time as new Kerbmates can be sent up to resume the operation. Or possibly even the entire thing is retasked and sent on to Duna. Who knows? Kerbin Kerbin has actually had a bit of a brainwave as well while she's out here. She has figured out that she can connect the container to the top of the computer control module and create a little tower, which also means that hopefully there will be no issues with the heat shield upon re-entry. It is Patlas's heat shield. If anybody can get the ship down, it is him. Kerbin Kerbin is going to stay on station here on the outside just in case there are any issues with the escape pod that may need her emergency assistance, but in the meantime Patlas is preparing to separate for the return of the first two Kerbmates to the planet Kerbin. And we have separation from the outpost. The escape pod 1 is separating from Wistar also 1. Because of the naming conventions used by the TV executives and producers, they obviously need to get their writing team in to come up with slightly snappier names and sets of terminology. Patlas Kerbin just operating the staging system and activating the rocket engines. Now, there is a very small fuel reserve on these escape pods, but the TV producer who went on the orbital mechanics course assures everybody that it will probably be enough. If not, then the Kerbals may well be trapped in orbit, unable to return and unable to get back to the Wistar One. But that's why Patlas is going first, right? Kerbin Kerbin just returning to the outpost to await confirmation as to whether herself and Juggly, the two remaining Kerbmates, can take to the escape pod 2. As it is also unimaginatively being called by the TV producers and executives down here. Patlas Kerbin has burnt through his fuel. Now, unfortunately, he is going to be descending on the dark side, which was because nobody actually thought ahead of time to check where the re-entry would happen. Only just enough fuel, to be fair, to bring this thing back down into the atmosphere, deep enough to cause a re-entry, but a re-entry is assured now. Nothing can stop it as it begins to bite into the atmosphere, the wispy upper atmosphere, to be fair. The heat shield oriented directly into the direction of travel so that when the compressive shock heating begins, the delicate interior will be protected. Of course, there is still a certain amount of uncertainty, even if this survives the re-entry process, as to whether the parachutes will be sufficient to safely cushion the fall to the ground. And also, nobody really gave any thought to whether it would be best to land on the solid land or indeed at sea, and therefore Patlas is just going to see where he ends up. No fuel is left on board, but it doesn't matter because the engines are pointing in the wrong direction to cushion the descent anyway. It is going to be falling heat shield down, and there is no separation mechanic either. Back on the station, the remaining Kerbmates have been given the OK to transfer to the escape pod 2, as certainly there does seem to be enough fuel, so a re-entry is definitely possible, assuming that all goes well with the re-entry process. They will be commanded to detach from the Wistar One and to proceed on themselves. Meanwhile, Patlas Kerbin and Lena Kerbin are starting to experience the effects of compressive shock heating as the ablative coating on the heat shield begins to burn away under the intense pressure and heat of re-entry. Meanwhile, back on the station, Kerbin Kerbin is beginning to transfer to the Escape Pod 2 to join Juggly Kerbin, the pilot of the Escape Pod 2. Patlas Kerbin now starting to comfort Lena Kerbin, who is looking a little bit worried. Patlas also is probably a little bit concerned because this is, of course, an untested spacecraft. However, it has now made it through that excessive heating phase, and he is preparing to deploy the parachutes. As we can see from inside the inside view, Lena Kerbin sitting at the back there. What is going on in her curious little green head? Who knows? Nobody knows. And Patlas Kerbin preparing to activate the chutes. He is leaving it a little bit late. It would be good to get those chutes deployed. There they go. There they go. The chutes are now successfully deployed. And everything looks good for a landing. Of course, we're not 100% certain at this stage, but the TV producers and executives are happy enough to command the remaining Kerbmates to detach from the station and to begin their own descent. Entering the final descent phase now for Patlas and Lena, and we're expecting full chute deployment any moment now as we pass 500 meters. There they go. There they go. The chutes have fully deployed and we have dropped down to a very acceptable descent velocity. It looks like we are going to be landing just in the bay there. A water landing, probably preferable. We'll have to wait and see. And we have touchdown, or splashdown, more accurately. Lena Kerbin and Patlas Kerbin, the two Kerbmates, two of the four Kerbmates, I should say, have made it safely back down to the planet Kerbin, and recovery teams are on the way. Meanwhile, still on orbit, we have had a bit of a mishap. The rookie pilot, Juggly Kerbin, in command of Escape Pod 2, has inadvertently activated the parachutes whilst on orbit instead of the engines. Kerbin Kerbin is stepping outside to see if she can do anything about this, possibly repack them. She is moving into position now with her light on. She is, of course, in the shadow of Kerbin at the moment, but it doesn't look like there's anything she can do. It looks like there's no way to disarm the parachutes once they have been armed. However, it shouldn't be an issue. We're reasonably confident. The TV executives and producers on the ground are reasonably confident that the parachutes will not, in fact, deploy until they have reached a certain altitude, and therefore everything should be fine. Kerbin Kerbin, of course, is considering if there can be any kind of solution involving blowing something up, but quite sensibly, she decides that she's just going to head back inside and hope for the best. Juggly Kerbin, a little bit sheepish there, but she is a bit of a rookie pilot. Both of them are thrilled to bits at the idea of returning home. And so, engines firing. The Escape Pod 2 says goodbye to the Wistar One as the Kerbmates, the last two Kerbmates, prepare to return triumphant-ish to Kerbin. Of course, Kerbin Kerbin may well have a legal challenge when she arrives back, but the Duna One and a bit team have elected not to tell her about that until she is safe back down on the ground, just in case she were to decide to blow something up or engage in some other unhinged activity. Not that any of the Kerbmates, of course, can be suspected of any kind of mental instability, having been selected through an incredibly rigorous and elaborate recruitment process to ensure that they are compatible with the mission goals at hand, not to mention making excellent reality television. And so, after descending successfully through the upper atmosphere and surviving re-entry, Kerbin Kerbin and Juggly Kerbin, who has expertly piloted this return capsule to be within shouting range of the Kerbal Space Center. Look at that, a much more effective entry. She is going to splash down just off the coast here, along with Gemby Kerman, the engineer. The legal team will, of course, whisk her off for discussions to decide what is to be done about Hobo Industries' legal challenge. This is almost certainly going to be very costly for the Duna One and a bit program. Will it spell the end of the program, or will they be able to continue and achieve their launch? We will have to find out next time. One thing is for certain, there will not be the money necessary for extensive testing and an on-orbit assembly of the launch stage. It's going to have to be done probably all in a one, using whatever funds they have left, which of course will be much more perilous and probably prone to disastrous failure, which the TV executives and producers are probably secretly quite happy about, as Gemby Kerman and Juggly Kerman splash down safe and sound just off the coast of the Kerbal Space Center.